Hi, I'm Jackie Leader, and welcome to Module 2, How to Write Concrete, Objective, Anecdotal Observations. We've already discussed how important observations are and some guidelines in writing observations. Now we're going to start looking at how to write objective observations. We've learned why we assess children and how we should assess young children. We've also started talking about what authentic assessment is and why it's so important to use with young children. These assessment strategies are part of the curriculum process, and today we're going to talk about observations. As we've learned from the audio and video lecture, observations is a skill that takes techniques and practice. In the last video, I listed some guidelines for writing observations. The last guideline was to write an observation as objective and accurate as possible. Today we'll learn how to do that. First, we need to review observations and think about what it tells us about a child. There are a few things that we're going to analyze when we start interpreting the observations. So we're going to be looking at, what does this observation tell us about the child? What are your overall impressions of the child? What skill does the child have, and what skills might need to be worked on? So here's the first observation. Donovan was hyperactive today. While building blocks with the other children, he was constantly knocking over the block structure on purpose and laughing. He then ran around the room wildly shouting vroom, vroom, buzz, buzz with his arms wide out, hitting children as he passed by. Donovan is 4 years old. Now this observation gives us a lot of information, but let's think about what it tells us about Donovan. What are your overall impressions of Donovan? You may think he's very impulsive. He has a hard time interacting with other children, and he seems to be wild and destructive. The observation tells us developmentally that he might need to work on his social development while playing with other children. He may also need to learn how to regulate his emotions. He got very hyper and active at the end, and it seemed hard to calm him down. Some skills you might make for Donovan, that you might want to work on with Donovan, are how to play with other children, how to calm down, and empathy for other children. So let's look at another observation. Donovan was playing in the block area for over 15 minutes today. He and the other children were stacking blocks on top of each other. He said 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 as he stacked 5 blocks on top of each other. Then he and another child counted 1, 2, 3 together and knocked over the blocks. They both laughed as the blocks fell down. They did this 3 or 4 times. Then Donovan said, "Let's be airplanes." He lifted his hands outward and began running around the block area going vroom, vroom, buzz, buzz. As he ran back into the block area, his arm hit another child. "Sorry," he said. Donovan is 4 years old. Now this observation paints a very different picture of Donovan. Let's talk about what our thoughts are about Donovan based on this observation. The overall impressions of Donovan is probably very different from the first one. In this one, he played very well with other children, and he was also using good pro-social language such as sorry when he hit the child with his arm going back into the block area. Developmentally, this observation tells us that he needs to work on his counting skills. He counted 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 when counting 5 blocks. He also may need help understanding where his body is in a physical spot when he was running through the block area and knocked into the other child. I would set different skills for Donovan based on the information from this observation. In this observation, I would set a skill on counting correctly up to 10. The observation gives us information that he's having a hard time with this. And also because he was bumping around to other children, he might need more activities to help him be aware of his body and what is around him. So these two observations definitely paint different pictures of Donovan and lead to different goals. So what's the difference? The first observation was written subjectively with a lot of judgment and personal bias in it. The second one was written accurately and objectively. So what does that mean? A subjective observation is one where we interpret the behaviors happening. We also have a lot of personal biases or judgments. The perspective that's written may be different from other people's perspective, and the information may not accurately be represented. In the first observation, we saw this when the information was left out about Donovan and his counting skills. Also, it didn't show that he was cooperatively doing the block building and knocking down with another child. So here's another example of a subjective observation. Tracy's playing a math path game. She did really well and she really enjoyed it. Now, how do I really know that Tracy liked the game? And what do I consider really well when it comes to playing the path game? Is it the same that you would consider really well? Our perspective of doing well may not be the same perspective. In contrast, an objective observation is just stating the facts. We're documenting the specific activities and behaviors we can observe without interpreting the behaviors. Now, we will be interpreting and analyzing what we see later, but we don't put it in the actual observation. We also want to document accurately what's being observed. In the example of Donovan in the first observation, it was left out that Donovan and the other children were working cooperatively towards the structure. This really changes the behavior from an act of aggression potentially to cooperative play. So let's look at the observation of Tracy playing the math game. Written objectively, it might sound something like this. Tracy was playing a math path game. She rolled the dice and got 2. She said, "I got 2." She then randomly moved her game pieces 2 places, not in order. She had a smile on her face and said, "This is fun." Now this observation gives us a lot of specific information. Instead of saying Tracy did really well in the path game, it specifically says she was able to identify the number 2 on the dice and she did move 2 spaces correctly. Instead of saying randomly she just had a good time, very specifically it said she had a smile on her face and said, "This is fun." Those are observable behaviors that we can document accurately. Now, there are many words and phrases that make an observation subjective. Laura J. Kolkler developed a very good strategy for finding out red flag words that shouldn't be used in observations. The categories she came up with cannot objectively be observed, and we really need to avoid using them in the observations. The first one is feelings, such as happy, lazy, or angry. I always tell people when I'm training them on writing observations, there's something physically the child is doing that makes you want to put that feeling tag on. So instead of saying that they're happy, write specifically they had a smile on their face. Another area we want to avoid is intelligence, such as dumb, smart, overachiever. These are general behavior things, not specific. So if you say a child is very smart, they might be doing well in the path game, but maybe they don't recognize their letters. So we want to be specific at what they can do and not make generalizations. We sometimes put our personal biases in when we put reasons for doing things, such as in the Donovan example, that he was knocking the towers over on purpose and he was out of control. These are tags that we don't need to use because it makes our observation subjective and we need to leave them out. And finally, self-concept, such as pretty, secure, and athletic. Many times I find staff feel that they need to add a tag like this to make the child look very positive and they want to have a positive view. We just need to leave these out because it doesn't add any value to our observations. Now this is part 1 of our discussion on objective versus subjective observations, and we are going to continue this conversation. But first we want to do some work in our discussion board. You're going to submit the observation you made on the child into the discussion board. You're then going to look at your observation and identify any red flag words and or phrases you might have used in the observation. Then you're going to review 2 classmates' observation and offer feedback on how they could improve theirs. Finally, after receiving the feedback from your peers, I'd like to rewrite your observation to be more accurate and objective and resubmit it into the discussion board. I look forward to reading everybody's discussions.